Hi everyone, Krista Travers here yet again, and I am so glad to be with you this morning. Very excited about our study. We are going to learn about Herod. Who was Herod? Let's jump in. We've got Matthew 2:3-8. So if you have your Bibles with you, then let's turn to that. When Herod the king heard this, basically that the Magi had come and they were looking for the king of the Jews. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah. For out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and when you have found him, report to me, so that I too may come and worship him." Lies. He was never going to come and worship him. Why? Because we know so much about Herod. Not just through the scriptures, but other historical documents tell us a lot about him as well. So, who was Herod? We're going to find that out today. Herod was born in 73 BC, and he was an Edomite. And so he wasn't of the tribe of Israel. He actually was of a Gentile nation, a pagan nation, but they converted to Judaism. And so he was raised in the Jewish faith. And so what he did was he approached the leaders in Rome, and he did obtain favor in Rome. His father, Antipater, he was a trusted friend of Julius Caesar. And Antipater, his father, he was made head of Jerusalem and Judea. And then Herod was made tetrarch or ruler of the Galilean area by Mark Antony. In 40 BC, we have the Parthian Empire attacking that area where Herod is ruling. And remember, the Parthian Empire was kind of a combination of the Medo-Persians and what was left of the remnant of the Babylonian Empire. And so they were a force. Herod, what he did when they came in was he rushed off to Rome and to tell them what was going on so that he could get some help. He convinced Rome that he was allegiant to Rome. Even though he was raised up in the Israelite faith, he was allegiant to Rome. And he needed an army, and so that's what they did. They gave him an army, and it was a good army. It took him about 3 years to get these guys out in 40 BC, but he did ultimately, and which established kind of his own kingdom there. What they called him in Rome was King of the Jews. They called Herod King of the Jews. So that's going to play a part, as you could probably tell, in the future when we have the Magi coming to him. He fought very hard for that title. He wanted that title. So when these kingmakers, of course, came into town, and we went over how the Magi were not kings, but they were kingmakers. They came into town asking, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews?" You know there's going to be trouble at that point. He fought very hard for that title. So let's talk about the expectation of the time. During that time, there was an expectation, not just in the Israelite nation, but Roman historians wrote about this expectation of a Messiah or a new ruler to come. You've got Suetonius. And I've got some quotes here from him, or a quote here from him. He was a Roman historian who wrote, "There had spread out all over the Orient an old and established belief that it was fated at that time for men to come from Judea to rule the world." So this was something that was in the minds of those of the Roman Empire as well as of the Jewish nation. Tacitus, who was another Roman historian, wrote, "There was a firm persuasion that at this very time the East was to grow powerful, and rulers coming from Judea were to acquire a universal empire." And then we also have Josephus, who was a historian of Jewish background. And he said that the Jews believed that one from their country would become governor of the habitable earth. Rome was scared of this Eastern Empire, scared of the East coming in and taking over. Rome controlled a lot of territories, but it hadn't quite gotten its hooks into the Parthian Empire. There were fights between the two of them, not just in 40 BC, but also in 55 BC before that. So Israel was right in the middle of those two huge forces. At the time of the birth of Christ, they were looking for a new king. This was well known. And the Magi were members of a council called the Megastanes. And those Megastanes, they were looking for a new king to come against Rome, as a power against Rome. Herod, it was well known what Magi were. Herod knew who they were, and they came in with all this great pomp and circumstance. Remember, they are very powerful. And so they came in with probably tons of people, troops surrounding them. These guys were king makers, so powerful. And it's also interesting to note that the first people to recognize Jesus as king were Gentiles. Pretty interesting. These Magi came in declaring that there was a king that had been born, and no one in the Jewish nation knew that. No one in Israel knew that. They knew it was to come, but it wasn't. They didn't know that it was going to be at that exact moment. And so that's when the Magi come in and they declare it. Also disturbing to Herod was the fact that his own army was out on a mission during the time that the Magi came through. Pretty frightening for him. Herod's name. Herod, he was given the name King of the Jews by Caesar Augustus. Both Herod and Caesar Augustus, by the time of Jesus' birth, were getting on in years, so they were a bit older, and so this was kind of a vulnerable time for them, knowing that they were weaker, knowing that they were older, and it would be a great time for another nation to come in and seize power. So another problem that Herod had was that he knew that the Israelites did not like him. He's an Edomite, but he had kind of played footsies with the Romans. In that respect, they did not like him. They did not trust him. They didn't like Roman rule, of course, and were expecting someone eventually to come and take them out from under that Roman rule. They saw Herod as one of Rome's puppets. Who was Herod personally? This man was paranoid, distrustful, power hungry, and he was brutal. So what do we see scripturally? Let's look at Matthew 2:12 through 18. Having been warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left their own country by another way. This is after they've visited the Christ child and after they've presented him with gifts. And now when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him." When Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night, so under the cover of night, and left for Egypt. He remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." Then, when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and its vicinity from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. So that prophecy was fulfilled there. Who was Herod? He was cunning. Number one, he was cunning. He had called together the chief priests and scribes to find out the locations of the birth of the Messiah. Number two, he was a manipulative liar. He told the Magi to find the child and that he too would go and worship him. Total lie. He wanted the child so he could kill him. Number three, he was fearful. He was fearful. He was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him at hearing about a new king of the Jews. And number four, he was brutal. He was brutal. He had all the male children, 2 years old and younger, slaughtered in Bethlehem. Now, when you think of this number, you think of him slaughtering all of these children, the number actually in Bethlehem at that time, there probably would have been, because it's such a small place, it's such a small town, there would probably have only been 20 or fewer children who were 2 years old and under who were male at the time. That's what a lot of historians have estimated. Still, it's a slaughter, and it's devastating, especially for those poor mothers. So there is one line that has always confused me a bit, and that is that when it says that he was troubled and all Jerusalem with him. Why would Jerusalem be troubled? Aren't they looking for a coming Messiah? Aren't they looking for someone to remove them from underneath this domination of Roman rule? They wanted that promised Messiah. Here's the deal. They knew Herod, and they knew his nature. They knew his characteristics. They knew what he had done in the past. And they knew that if Herod was disturbed, they might have to pay for it. And they did, ultimately, with the sacrifice of their children, male children who were 2 years old and under. So what is the history? Why would they be fearful? Well, Herod was very paranoid. He was paranoid because he thought people were conspiring against him. He thought that they were going to try to take away his power, try to usurp his authority. He had 2 of his wives executed because he thought they were conspiring against him. He also had 3 of his sons, 3 of his own sons, his own flesh and blood, executed as well. And lastly, he had his mother-in-law executed because he thought she was conspiring against him. So this guy was very paranoid. The Jews had good reason to fear him. Herod was known as Herod the Great. Herod did do some good things. He is known as Herod the Great because of all of the building that he did during that time. He did seek Jewish favor, so he did want the Jewish nation to like him. He did, during a time of need, he gave grain, free grain, to the Israelites, and he also waived taxes for a time so that it wouldn't be as much of a burden on them. He encouraged development of the synagogue. He was dedicated to rebuilding and beautifying the temple in Jerusalem and restoring that. And he also loved Roman culture. So he built theaters, amphitheaters. He built hippodromes. A hippodrome is, those tracks that you see they had chariot races on. You might have seen them in movies, but it was like they're an ancient NASCAR. He loved Rome. He loved Roman architecture, and so he did build a lot in that vein, Roman architecture. And this brought a lot of disdain from the conservative Israelites, the lower class Israelites, as well as those very conservative Pharisees who were in power. So they saw him as a sellout, basically. After Joseph and Mary fled, Herod died in March or April of the year 4 BC. What did this guy die of? Some historians believe it was intestinal cancer, but I did find this quote from this Dr. Jan Hirschman, who is a practicing doctor, but also professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine. What they write is, the text that we depend on for a close description of Herod's last days lists several major features of the disease that caused his death. Among them, intense itching, painful intestinal problems, breathlessness, convulsions in every limb, and gangrene of the genitalia. That's a little more than you wanted to know, huh? So what it looks like is it was probably a chronic kidney disease, so kidney failure, compounded with what is now known today as Fournier's gangrene of the nether regions. Not sure what was going on there. Don't want to know. Does not sound pleasant, but it looks like his death was not the prettiest thing to see. At this point, you're probably asking, well, then if Herod died, who is this Herod that Jesus interacted with? So I'm going to tell you this. There was not just one Herod. There were 4. So you've got the one Herod, Herod the Great, and he had sons and daughters, but he had 3 sons who were also called Herod. He had Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus, and Herod Philip. Herod Archelaus, he's the first one that we see in the scriptures after Herod the Great. He ruled over Judea and Samaria. Matthew 2:21 through 23. Let's take a look at that one. Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in the place of his father Herod, so that's Herod the Great, he was afraid to go there. Then, after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee and came and lived in a city called Nazareth. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. This Herod Archelaus did not rule for very long. He actually was oppressive and erratic in nature, and he only ruled a few years before Caesar Augustus deposed him in AD 6. Next, we come across Herod Antipas. This was the Herod that we know during Jesus's ministry. So this was the Herod who beheaded John the Baptist. He was the one who wanted to meet Jesus because he had heard all of these things about Jesus of Nazareth and all the miracles he was doing and so forth, wanted him to perform miracles for him. Pilate sent Jesus during his trial to this Herod. Those are all the Herods. So when I said we were going to study who was Herod, I should have said we were going to study all the Herods, because there were 4 of them. Although Philip we don't really have much to do with. Those are the Herods. I really enjoyed this study. It was really neat and fascinating to go back and take a look at the history. And if you want to look up more concerning this, then I encourage you to do so. What we're going to look at is the gifts of the Magi. They had so much meaning and depth, and not just meaning in what they gave, but meaning as to who Jesus actually was. The gifts in themselves were a declaration of who Jesus was. And I love how God just gives us these rich texts. Stay with me and dig deep with me. We're going to learn so much. We're going to draw closer to the Lord. And so I just want to encourage you in that today. Thank you so much for spending time with me. And if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and list them in the comments down below. I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe out there.